All righty. Good evening, everyone. It's another Friday evening in the spring. Welcome. This is our eighth webinar in the 2024 um, series. So, and as we are moving through the mid part of April, if last weekend was any indication, the 2024 soaring season should be really interesting, at least at our club. We saw 7 members post 11 flights to the OLC. One was over 600 kilometers, two were over 500 kilometers, two were over 400 kilometers, three were over 200 kilometers, and two were over 100 kilometers. Personal note, I finished my flight review last weekend, so yay, I'm ready for the season to start. And of course, what happens? This weekend it's supposed to be cold and wet. I'm sitting here looking out a window, then got snow falling. So April 19th and snow's falling. Oh well. And we have a bunch of folks that are getting their gliders annualed over the next 2 weekends. And so for us anyway, the 2024 season is underway. So tonight's topic, we're on flight tracking. And, as normal, our presentation is going to be available on the members SSA site. So you log in, go to your My Homepage, News, Resources, Webinars. And if you click on the webinar title, you get the recording. If you click on the slides, you get the download of the slides in PDF format. One of the things you may want to consider doing is being sure that you get the slides, because we've got several little mini tutorials in this session on setting up your tracking capabilities. So, you may want to download that. It could give you a little bit of help if you're having trouble setting up your tracking device. Webinar acknowledgements. Again, thank you to the SSA for making the webinar software available, and Frank Whiteley for doing the hostmaster job for us this evening. As many of you are aware, but just to be sure everyone is, these sessions are available for Wings proficiency, so they get Wings credit. These three folks in our club are members of the FAA's FAST team, and they're the ones that make sure that these get properly vetted with the FAST team and then scheduled, and then they make sure, if you registered with your Wings email address or your user ID that you use for Wings, then you'll be getting credit for this. Now, the FAA's guidelines for this is they do allow online seminars to count for Wings credit, but only the live seminar counts for credit. The watching the video does not count. Some of our instructors participate, so one or more of these folks are in the background to collect and answer your questions during the webinar. There will be time for a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The instructor that's sitting with us this evening, if it's something that is germane to what we're doing right now, he'll go ahead and interrupt and ask. So, flight tracking. This one's kind of fun. There are several folks that have contributed a lot to the environment that we have today. Pedja Bogdanovic, the Soaring Club of Boulder, Soaring Society of Boulder, came up with a tracking concept using what the FCC calls a personal communication services, what we all call cell phones or smartphones, what we used to call cell phones. But he came up with an app for the iPhone, a web application, and a web server to support all of that. Unfortunately, that mechanism is no longer operational. Over the last 2 years, Davis Chapin's, the Arizona Soaring Association, has been working to acting as an evangelist for OGN Network. And so he's done several things. He's developed interfaces that allow spot data, Garmin InReach data, and ADSB data to be crossed over from those data sources and placed out on the OGN network. He's operating the translation server for those interfaces. And then he was one of probably the primary spark plug behind the deployment of 140 OGN ground stations in the USA. Now, this was with SSA financial support and the individual SSA members, that took the bull by the horns, got these systems from Davis and got them installed at their locations. And I really need to sing out for one of our members, John Gillis, for Black Forest Soaring Society, because in working, he installed our initial one site, and then working with Davis, brought online an additional 5 sites. So we've got 6 ground stations in the south central part of Colorado, and he was in charge of the deployment and is the administrator for those sites. So what we're going to do this evening is examine flight tracking options and give you some hints and a little bit of guidance. When we look at this, the glider tracking provides reports of a glider location. So we get lat long. Some of the systems will do altitude, and some of the systems support a messaging capability. Okay. Now, what the glider tracking mechanisms that we're looking at this evening, they do not provide an automatic emergency locator transmitter kind of capability. So these are not ELTs. All right. We got involved with the glider tracking. It all started with safety. And part of this is because gliders are seldom on FAA flight plans. Gliders seldom carry ELTs. And really, until the advent of the 406 megahertz ELTs that came with GPS locators, ELTs were basically useless for the kind of flight profile that we fly. Gliders are often always away from the home airport for hours at a time, and that means they're out of radio range, so we don't know where they are. We don't know, we know nothing about them unless we have some kind of tracker system. The other one that's amazing is how much distance we cover. We cover hundreds of miles. And at least in our club, our members often head off in very different directions. It may be one or maybe 2 people or 3 people will bump into each other way out there, but it's for the most part, it's individual efforts. It's not team flying, although we're trying to work on that this summer to help people to move into cross country by doing some team flying. What it does do is it provides a status on the locations of our members during the day, and it also helps reduce the search area if assistance is needed. I'm going to say for landouts, but okay. But if assistance is needed, we can help. Now, what we need to take a look at is the tracking architecture. So we've got some kind of position data that comes into the glider. The glider has some kind of position processing, so it takes the data and says, oh, here's where I am. And then we've got the glider to ground communications across some channel. And then on the ground, something happens. And then from that something happens, then we maybe get some kind of indication of where the pilots are. So back in the I won't say the good old days. I think we're in a golden age right now. But basically, the pilot looked outside, and then sitting in the glider, he figured out where he was. And for the glider to ground communications, whenever the pilot felt like it, he might say something like Yankee 7 over Fremont headed south. And of course, that went out over on 123.3. And on the ground, hopefully somebody heard the radio call. They might tell somebody, and somebody might make a note of it. And that was about the extent of our tracking. And for some of our pilots who are real soft talkers, all you knew is they'd keyed the mic. So now, as we move into the environment that we have today, so we've got GPS satellites up there that are transmitting signals down to us. By the way, it takes at least 4 satellites to get an unambiguous 3-dimensional position. Yeah. just an aside. So that's coming down over a radio frequency link to the glider. So in the glider, we've got processing that allows the signals that we receive from the GPS satellites to be turned into a position. And then we have uh, equipment that is taking that position and sending it to the ground across some channel. And I say single units and I say multi-units. In some cases, it's a unit that contains everything is in one little box. And in other cases, maybe the GPS position is computed in one box and uh, getting it sent out is in another box, that kind of thing. So for instance, if you had a tablet, like an ODN with the cell phone circuit in it, and you're running the Navigator software, so there you've got a box that's doing it all. The FLARM does it all, but you may have a smartphone that's doing it, and you're running Navigator software and then shipping it out over the cell phone network. So that's coming out over the RF link. On the ground, whatever kind of system that we're using processes and distributes the position information on the ground. Generally, it seems like it goes out over a network at that point, and then it's displayed somewhere. Okay, so to get a little better picture of what we're talking about. So we have systems like SPOT and InReach, OGN, which is using the FLARM data. We have smartphones and tablets that are communicating. And then we have the FAA with the ADSB-Out system. So we've got those 5 systems. Each one has their own processing. So SPOT processes SPOT data and then puts it out on the SPOT server. The same with InReach. The FAA processes it and puts the data out and makes it available. You can see it from third-party APIs. And then with the smartphone and tablet, that comes out and can get shipped out. Now, those items can be shipped out across a network because they've got their own distribution channels. But we've also got an input network channel that comes into the OGN because of its architecture. And for instance, what Davis has done for us is he's created a interface that takes the data, pushes it across the network to OGN so that SPOT, InReach, and ADSB data is available on the OGN channels. And then CU Navigator, they have the OGN layer, and so they're taking the OGN data or shipping out the data to the OGN network from their tablet or from the cell phones running their software. So, and then OGN itself is shipping the data out so that it's available in the soaring community for position displays, mapping displays, and that kind of thing. Now, our enabling technology, just like a lot of our navigation and collision avoidance stuff, comes back in. It's dependent upon the GPS system. The other one that is coming in, and this is probably a big advance for us when you stop and think about it, and that's we're getting the glider connection to a traffic infrastructure from a glider that's airborne to the ground infrastructure. That's something that we did not have not too many years back. When we look at the issues associated with the glider trackers, these are low power transmitters. So they're not pumping out hundreds of watts. They may even only be pumping out, 1 or 2 watts, or maybe even less, maybe milliwatts. They're working on shared frequencies. Like, for instance, the FLARM operates on a band called Industrial, Scientific, and Manufacturing in the United States. You may have heard it referred to as the ISM band. So that's a block of frequencies that are shared and don't specifically require licenses, although they do want the for above a certain power, they want the transmitters or the transceivers to be a certified transceiver. The other one is we're prone to lost messages because the mechanism that we're using is open loop. So there's no guarantee of delivery of any specific memory of message. It's just thrown out. And if it's received somewhere and processed, that's great. But there's no guarantee that it would be received and processed. Okay. Probably one of the biggest problems that we face individually is we're prone to device configuration errors. And that's mainly because we're getting an awful lot of complexity in our cockpits. Uh, we've got to maintain software baselines. We've got to maintain configurations, and it's easy for an error to slip in. One of the most common errors in a FLARM system is when you borrow somebody's FLARM stick in order to update the firmware in your unit, and they've got their configuration file on there, and their configuration file is now written to your device. And so all of your settings, you may have gotten the new software, but all of your settings are now screwed up. And then the other one is the tracking is not in real time. In other words, it isn't up to less than a second. There's some delay in there. So the tracking displays are generally seconds up to multiple minutes behind the actual location of the gliders. But, in general, that's probably close enough for us. I mean, even if you're running 100 knots and it's 10 minutes behind, you're still, that's a whole lot better than not knowing where you were at all. We've got two types of trackers. We've got the trackers that are using satellite-based communications infrastructure to get the information from the glider to the ground. And then we have the gliders that are using ground-based communication infrastructures to get the data from the gliders to the ground. With one exception, which is the OGN network. That was redundant, I'm sorry. With one exception, the OGN, all of these communication systems that we're using, that we're taking advantage of, this equipment was built for other purposes, and we've just been able to piggyback on it. So, first one we're going to talk about are the satellite-based communication systems. There are two major satellite systems that are being used to support what we're doing. The Iridium constellation, and this does satellite voice and data services. It has 76 satellites. Basically, this is a huge phone system in the sky, and Garmin InReach uses Iridium. The Global Star satellite constellation also does voice and data services. It has 24 ground stations and 48 satellites, but they use a different approach, and I'll describe that here in a couple of minutes. And Spot is owned by Global Star. So with the Iridium satellites, part of what we have here is we've got a number of orbital planes. That's the vertical lines going across this globe. And they all converge at the poles. So you have coverage all the way into the North Pole and the South Pole. These guys are fairly low orbiters. They're flying at a little less than 500 miles above the surface of the Earth. The interesting thing about Iridium's approach is the satellites talk to each other, and so they do call switching on orbit. So they can talk to each other along the plane that they're in, that's the solid line, and then they can talk diagonally to a satellite that is in a position, that's the dotted lines. So we could have a satellite that's receiving, let's say this satellite over here looks like might see Hawaii, and it's going to talk to something in CONUS. They could bounce the signal over to this satellite, bounce the signal up here, and then bounce it down to a ground station in the US. And so all of that non-terrestrial path, you didn't have to have the path on the ground, and one satellite didn't have to see both Hawaii and the continental US. Okay, so fewer ground sites are required by this approach. This is a visualization. Each of those little orange circles is a satellite's view of the ground. So you can see this is in between where you see a major jump is about 10 minutes of system time. And the reason the circles are larger at the poles than they are at the equator, that's a distortion caused because we're using a Mercator projection for this map. So global star satellites are not, they are, they use an inclined orbit. These birds fly at about 900 miles above the ground, so they've got fewer satellites and fewer orbital planes that they're using, but you can still see the same thing. There's several satellites on each one of these lines. There's no coverage at either pole, but for most, well, for what we do, it doesn't matter, but for a lot of services, that doesn't matter. This is a bent pipe system, which means that the satellite, so I'm circling a satellite right here, has to see both ends of the communication. So let's say there's a glider in Northern California and their ground station is over here in Missouri. I don't know where the ground station is. I'm just using that as an example. If this satellite can see both locations, then it can send the signal from the glider to the ground station. Okay, so the satellite has to see both the tracker and the ground site. Here's the coverage map for Globalstar. And so, all of the US is covered at all times. Western Europe, Northern Africa, uh, down in over Australia and New Zealand, they're all have good coverage for the Globalstar satellites. Now, to give a feel for the way it works, this is a figure from Spot, but it applies both. It also applies to the InReach. So on the left side of this line is tracker into the ground system. On the right side of this line is the ground system sending a signal back out to the tracker. Okay. So what we've got here is we've got the trackers. I've circled two of the devices, and then they're going to bounce it through the satellite down to the ground and then into ground processing for processing. And this is going to take whatever came from you or from your tracker and turn it into something that's usable. And then from there, it can go out as a dissemination. So it could go out as an email or text message, emergency services, or it could be displayed on a website. And all of those things happen with the spot signal. And then the thing that happens on the right-hand side is something originates, could originate in an email or a cell phone or emergency services or a website and gets sent out to the ground antenna up to the satellite and then down to the device in the vehicle. Some of the items, Garmin has a real cute little tracker. You can see even with the antenna, it's 4 inches by 2 inches. Here's pictures of Spot. This is the original, what they call personal locator, and then this is the Spot 3. And then this guy is basically a satellite phone, but it's a tracker, but it can handle voice and it can handle text messages. I've got a Garmin device pictured, an older Garmin device pictured, but Spot also has a device that will do the same thing. When we're looking at the satellite-based trackers, some of these numbers are worst case numbers, but basically Spot, you get position date sent periodically, 10 to 20 minutes kind of thing. It's transmit only. On the personal locators, they do have a device that is both transmit and receive. Basically on the transmit only, which is what most of us would be using, they have 3 types of messages. They're defined in the profile, user profile. So you have an OK message, you have a need some help message, and then those 2 are user defined. And then the 3rd type message is a fixed definition, and that's an emergency message that goes to an emergency services processing center. Again, 48 satellites in the constellation. The devices, I just checked these prices this afternoon. You can get the locator device for 145. You can get the one that can handle bidirectional for 250. Those are often discounted. Your basic tracking service is 175 a year. If you look at their website, you'll say, no, that's not 175. It's 145 or 150 or 135, something like that. But there is always a $30, $25 kicker that goes on there to keep your service. You pay for the subscription, but you also got to pay for them turning the switch back on again. Garmin InReach, again, you're in the 10 to 20 minute range. They have SMS style text messages. They have an emergency contact. In their case, they're operating with 76 satellites. Remember, they're running at a lower orbit. Their devices are more expensive, $300 to $400. Their tracking services, they've got lots of options. The bottom end is about $15 a month, and the higher end is about $50 a month. Both services have they have different names for it, but it's a flexible service where you could run it for just a couple of months a year and then turn it back off. Okay. One of the things, there's a default position message goes out, default time for it. You can get them, the Spot 3 and 4 devices with a firmware update can get it down to faster times. Same with Garmin, you can get faster times. But it's kind of like car racing. Speed costs money. How fast do you want to go? Alrighty. So some of these will have altitudes associated with them, not just a lat long position. Some of them don't. So our airborne communications infrastructure. So this is for the ground-based systems. The first one we'll look at, this is a map of Colorado and probably about an 18-month-old map of the cell towers around Colorado. The blue circles, the link that's on there would take you to the most current one, and it'll be the whole US map. You can zoom in like this. The red X's are single towers, and then the blue dots with the numbers in them are sites that have multiple towers, and the number means how many towers are in there. Now, this is only the towers that are built specifically for cell phones. Or for using smartphones. If it's mounted on your church or it's mounted on a grain elevator or something else, those aren't in this depiction. So, and like for us, our little airport is the teardrop right here. And so we have several towers that are roughly 4 to 5 miles to the east of us. We've got some that are about 4 miles to the west of us. And again, this was about 18 months ago, so this may have more. And also, again, this is only the towers that are built specifically for cellular communication. Again, so if it's on top of a grain elevator or something like that, that's not shown on these maps. Basically, the way this works, very similar. We've got the tracker. We're receiving our data from the GPS satellite. We've got our tracker. We're going to go out over the cell network, come in on the processing, and then we're going to have the dissemination coming out that gets it out onto the internet or gets it wherever, whether it's a text message or whether it's our lat long message, our position message. Okay. Now, one of the things many of you probably do remember when they said that you can't operate cell phones in airplanes, and that even operating cell phones from the top of a mountain, like out here in Colorado, you get up 14,000 feet, whip your old analog cell phone out, and you hit so many towers that the system didn't know how to deal with it. When they shifted from analog transmission to digital transmission, that alleviated the airborne interference problems. And the FCC classes our smartphones as personal communication devices, not cell phones. So we can use them in the airplane. Apps on the cell phones. So there are others. I'm just highlighting this. because this is probably the most common one folks are going to grab, but both Apple and Android, the Navigator or CU, depending on how you want to refer to it, Navigator software will run on both. You're using the cell network system, and uh, the Navigator app is free, but it's got some limitations. And then when you pay an annual fee, which by the way gives you access to all of Navigator's products like CU on your computer at home and access to the cloud and stuff like that. So it's not, they don't have a menu system. You pay one annual fee and you get access to all of the things that you're licensed for. The Open Glider Network, OGN, has a ground infrastructure. It's intended for FLARM devices, for FLARMs and OGN trackers. So the OGN tracker is a device that transmits a FLARM-like signal, and but that signal is not processed by FLARM, but it is processed by the OGN ground system. And this now includes soft RF. FLARM made an update to their in-flight firmware or their in-package firmware for the boxes, and it has now made the soft RF devices invisible to a FLARM, but carried as a tracker, they are still visible to the ground network. So the OGN is a specific ground receiver network that has been put in place to, for our FLARMs. That's basically and the FLARM trackers.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
We have two questions about OGN. One question is, where can we access it, and what exactly is OGN?
Uh, well, hold that thought and more to come.
Roger that. Thanks.
Okay, so OGN, this is a crowd-funded system. So people have gotten together and said, we want to have this capability. Originally, FLARM wasn't real happy about it, but they've actually, I guess, been working with the OGN people now. Basically, their architecture, OGN is a collection of ground receivers. So you can see the 3 ground receivers right there, and a set of servers that the ground receivers talk to the servers across the network, across the internet, however you want to think of that. And then these servers process the data. There's communication between the servers, and then these servers make that position data available, pushing it out. And then what you have out here is running on the local machine. Now, it may be a web application or it could be a full-blown application on the machine, is the display software that allows you to use the data. The way it works in Europe, FLARM is used in light aircraft, and it's used in UAVs, in drones, in addition to the gliders. We think of it primarily as glider system. So the units in the aircraft hit the ground receiver antennas. The ground receiver formats it into a message, sends it off to the server. The server accumulates it and makes the data available out to clients out here for display purposes. Okay. One of the things that can happen, there's a capability in the FLARM, which most of us are probably not aware of, is it is possible for a FLARM to forward nearby traffic. So in this case, this is a tracker that doesn't have direct visibility to an antenna, but he could bounce it off of this glider up here, and the FLARM in the glider would forward that message. So that's kind of interesting. So what we have here is our trackers. I'm showing just the ones in the aircraft or in the sailplanes. And it comes down through the antenna to the receiver, is sent by a message into the processing system, and then we get the dissemination on the back side. Okay. Now, this is in the US for 2024, this is the ground stations in the United States, the dots and such. This link goes to a worldwide display that then you can zoom in down to this level. So let's go do that. And so that's Europe. The blue dots are the stations. The yellow are the tracks that have been seen this year. I'm going to swing us over and zoom us in. So back it out a little bit and you can see some dots along the Front Range. So we have all the way from Cheyenne, and this is down to Moriarty, New Mexico. There is one site that's right in this area that's not shown right now. It doesn't come online until it's out in a summer home for someone, and right now there's 5 feet of snow up there. But when they go in and open up their house and turn their solar system back on, they allow us to keep it up there, and it'll turn on, and we'll get data from another site down here. Now, to give you an idea, uh, one of the things you can do with this map, these are tracks from 2024. I'm going to go over and touch the track, and that particular position was reported to 2 of the receiving stations. And here's one that is reporting to 3 of the receiving stations. And as we go up, there's one that has Fort Collins, Denver. Remember, Fort Collins is about 50, 60 miles north of Denver and down to Kelly Air Park. So that's from where that little hand cursor is down to Kelly Air Park is probably about 30 miles, maybe 40 miles. So basically, you've got a transmitter that was in a glider at sufficient altitude that he was hitting 3 sites with over 100 miles from the 2 end sites. So this particular installation gives us good coverage along the Front Range of the Rockies back into the mountains, about 50, 60 miles, all the way back into Buena Vista and south down to Moriarty. And actually, you have to remember is that they'd have good reception south of there. So we're covering, um, you know, Colorado's 300 miles here. This is another 200 down to here, and a little bit up into Wyoming. So that's a pretty good coverage area. You can see the coverage area over Arizona, uh, for Tucson, up towards the Phoenix area, Southern California, Central California, and then the area up around Williams, up in the Sacramento area. And then you can see the things like out of Minden and down I'm thinking that's the Whites, that's a flight path on the Whites. And then up in Northern California. So we get good coverage. We have 11 sites right here along the Front Range, and that's absolutely fantastic. So flight tracking with, oops, flight tracking with ADSB. We covered some of this with the in the collision avoidance, but what we've got here is we have the ADSB-Out that is in the aircraft. So those are our trackers. It comes down either on 1090 megahertz or 978 megahertz, depending on whether it's UAT or the transponder. It's processed in the FAA's ground station, and then it's disseminated. Okay. One of the things that happened recently is Davis Chapin's came up with a mechanism for forwarding ADSB from the FAA's environment to the OGN environment. That was the little block that I showed. So he's running a Raspberry Pi at home with Spot and InReach to OGN scripts. He brings it online at night. He has a certain amount of logic around that. They're running into problems in Europe right now because folks are crossing ADSB into the OGN environment in Europe, and it's flooding the OGN. One of the things that Davis is doing with his system is he's looking at both the OGN website and the data coming from the ADSB-Out feed that he's connected to, and making sure that he's only putting the ADSB data into the OGN network or into the OGN if that target aircraft is not currently being displayed in the or not currently being managed in the OGN network. So our implementation in the United States is not flooding the OGN. They're having problems in Europe with sites that are flooding OGN. And then he runs this, at least he was, he may be running it on a wider time period, but he was running it 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, 7 days a week. When we're looking at map displays, a spot map display is straight segments in between fixes. You notice that there are some numbers out here. Those numbers mean the number of fixes at that location. So the 4 fixes right here, and if this signal came out every 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, then somebody sat there for 40 minutes thermaling, is what that would give you an indication of. Okay. There are a number of Open Glider network displays. GliderNet was probably the first one. So here's the Open Glider Network page, and you'll be seeing this again later, but what I wanted to point out to you is over here on this left side, this is a list of display sites that are displaying the OGN data. Okay. The original display that was used was kind of simplistic. It's still used by many people. Again, I'll bring it over here. So, we can see that there's a signal over here, and there's a paraglider that's still in the air. Okay. So you can see the data from him, and you can see his registration number. He's at 1,564 meters. Actually, that low, he might be sitting on the side of a mountain since I don't see any horizontal velocity associated with him. Okay. Let's see what we've got out here. So here's a ASG-29, and he says 17 meters. So yeah, he's sitting on the ground at Williams. And then here's another hang glider that looks like he's sitting on the ground. Well, we should expect that. I mean, we're almost 7 o'clock in California now. So this is one of the displays. Glide and Seek. Glide and Seek does show where the receiver sites are. So Cheyenne, this is Owl Canyon for Colorado Soaring Association, Soaring Society of Boulder's site, the site on our airfield at Kelly Air Park for Black Forest. We have one up by Buena Vista, one at Salida, one at Canyon City, Pueblo West, And then we have a sixth one down here. Like I said, it's offline right now because of the season. And glide radar, we see most folks probably are used to seeing this one. Again, I've got it zoomed out, so it's just showing the sites. Uh, the ones where you see, I'll zoom it out a little more, where you see the red dots, that indicates that there's actually traffic or there's signals being received at those locations. So we could zoom in and see that. Tim Bromhead in New Zealand has brought a new site online, and it's got an interesting presentation. You click on the aircraft, and if it's got the altitude, so you've got the altitude and what looks like ground. And if you click on the aircraft, you can get additional information. So this is a ASW 27-18, so an ASG 19 or 29, I mean. That's flying, and so he's sitting on the ground. This is out north of Sacramento, so that's at Williams. And you can see his flight path. So this is a real nice site. I haven't played with it a whole lot other than to get a feel for the kind of information it's displaying. And I do like the presentation that he has on it, so it might be something worth considering. WeGlide is also has a viewer. Now, one of the limitations, all of the other viewers that we have looked at are taking any traffic that OGN supports. WeGlide only tracks gliders that are registered in the OGN's database, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So to some extent, it may be a little less friendly. So we can see that we've got a glider, a Pegasus. Looks like, yeah, he's landed at Mendon Tahoe right here. And then if we go back over here to Williams, we'll see the oh, come on. Oh, it's dropped off already. Yep. Oh, wait a minute. There we go. So we've got the one sitting at Williams right now, and he's landed, but we also get to see the trace. But in this case, these are gliders that were registered with the OGN database, and we'll be talking about that in just a couple of minutes. Okay, my tracker configuration in my glider. I carry a spot satellite tracker, so it's going to be displayed on the spot map site, and it's going to be displayed over on OGN. I have a FLARM in the aircraft, and so from a tracker perspective, it's going to connect to the OGN ground station. I have Navigator running on an Android tablet that's tethered to my smartphone, so it's going to send its data to OGN, and then I have the ADSB-Out that goes to the FAA and then gets over to OGN. Now, the important thing to realize here is I've got 4 devices in my aircraft. 3 out of the 4 devices, I can configure the identifier. It's called the ICO address, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So I have the same address set in my FLARM, in Navigator, and my ADSB-Out, and that is the ICO address for my specific glider. Spot doesn't understand that, so, can't have everything. But you do not want to have 4 devices in your aircraft reporting 4 different IDs, because one, all 4 pieces of traffic then will end up on the displays and in the processing, and So one, it's overloading or it's putting more traffic out there than needs to be, and it doesn't allow some filtering on it so that you're only getting one out to the display, even though all three or four are available. So that's something you have to think about. Using your tracker. Now, what you're going to have to do is you've got to configure your system. The just a second. I'm trying to get my mouse to do something that it doesn't want to do for some reason. Okay, so with your tracker, you've got to configure for the user, the aircraft, and the messages. Now, the messages may be configured in the tracker. They may be configured in the processing site. Like with Spot, the messages are canned. Whichever button I push the OK button and it sends my OK message. I push the help button, it sends the message that I've got set up to say, I'm landing out. And then the help button or the 911 button, that's the one that I don't get to control. That goes to an emergency, an EMS processing center. When you're looking at who's processing your data, you've got to create a user profile. You're going to tell it what kind of vehicle you are, those kind of things, and if it supports messages, what kind of messages you want to send out. And then you've also got to take a look at the dissemination channel. So for instance, like with Spot and InReach, you're setting it up. You're setting your account up so that it can forward the data so that Davis's processing in his little box and his scripts can then take that data and push it over to OGN. Okay. But so you've got roles in configuring this equipment. It just isn't black magic. It just doesn't happen by itself. You've got to do something to make it happen. The other thing that you've got to do is you've got to be very sure you know how to use your device. The first generation Spot tracker, they called it the satellite personal tracker, caused a lot of problems for folks. So you got an on-off switch right here. You hold it to turn it on. You hold it for 4 to 6 seconds. Once the LED up here starts flashing, it's working. To turn it off, you hold this button for 4 to 6 seconds, and once that LED goes out, it stops flashing. You're turned off. The OK button, this is the one that everybody had trouble with. The OK button, if you press it and release it quickly, it will send your I'm OK message. If you press it and hold it for about 6 seconds, 4 to 6 seconds, it will start flashing at the same rate as the power button. And once it does that, you are now in tracking mode, and it will send the message every 10 to 20 minutes. It will send a message out for you. It should be 10 minutes, but you know. And then if you want to turn it off, you hold it for 4 to 6 seconds. This LED turns red. It's normally flashing green. It turns red to tell you that, yeah, I'm turning off the tracking mode. And then when the LED goes out, it's sent the last of its messages. Help over here is a user-defined message. You hold it for 4 to 6 seconds, and then the LED up there flashes, and it's going to trigger sending the help message. I use this for my outlandings. So it goes to certain phones and a couple of email addresses that says, I'm landing out. Here's my position. Here's my phone number. Oh, by the way, give the club a call so that they know that somebody needs to come get me. And then the 911 button over here. This one has a rim around it. On the later versions, they actually have a cover over it. You hold it for 4 to 6 seconds, and it sends an emergency message that goes out to the EMS responders. It goes into a central site. They take a look at the location, and then they contact the EMS personnel with that is closest to the location that you're saying, I need help. So when you put these things in your glider, you've got to know what their capabilities are, and you've got to know how to use them properly. An awful lot of folks with the first generation thought they were turning their tracking on, and all they did was they sent a "I'm okay," or they just sent the okay message while they were sitting on the runway at the airport, and then you didn't hear anything from them again until after they landed and they punched the okay button again. In setting up your tracker, okay, these are the little tutorials that I mentioned earlier, and you may want to get the you may want to download the slide deck so you have this information because the links do work. So if possible, you want to use the same address for all the tracking devices in your glider. So your CU Navigator, your FLARM, and your ADSB-Out. You want to convert the N number of your glider to the ICAO address. And the easiest way to do that is to go to a site like this one. And I'm going to use the N number for my club's K21 as the example for this. And it doesn't have a FLARM in it. And so, oops. So it's November 134 Kilo Sierra. And its hex number, its ICAO number is this 6-digit hex string, so A3569F. Okay, that's how you get it in the United States, and I think also in Canada. So N numbered registered aircraft and Canadian numbered registered aircraft, you can enter the N number and it will calculate the ICAO address. And on some tools, you can put in the ICAO address, and then it will give you back the N number. So if you change the N number on your glider, by the way, your ICAO address will change, which means if you change you get a new glider, or you buy a glider and you change the N number to something that means something to you, then all of the trackers in there, all the ICAO addresses need to change to the new N number because they are algorithmically related. They're calculated from each other. For setup for OGN, you need to go to the OGN database. I've got a link for it here. Again, we're out to the OGN site. And if you don't have an account, you need to create an account. I've got an account. So this is my account. I've got 2 gliders. I have a Ventus BT, and I'm in a partnership in an ASH 26. So I carry, each aircraft has its own, like I said, each aircraft has its own FLARM, its own navigator setup, and its own transponder. So the information that you put out there, notice that I've got ICAO for my addressing. Even though we're talking about OGN, I'm using my ICAO address for everything. If I did not have the transponder, or I only had FLARM in there, then I would select, let's go over here and hit the edit so I can show you. You can select a ICAO address, a pure FLARM address, or an OGN tracker address so that you can put those in. And then you can also make the determination here that you either want your aircraft to be identified, or you don't want it to be identified. You want it to be tracked, or you don't want it to be tracked. You have that kind of thing. And then you certify that you're owner of the device. I will say that the OGN devices database has had some problems. Recently, they added a timeout or an age out on the entries, simply because people were selling gliders and not releasing the account. And since they didn't release the glider from their account, the new owner couldn't register. And of course, like in Europe, where you're crossing national boundaries and things like that, it didn't always work out that well. Okay, so you create an account, you register your glider, and you use your ICAO address for your glider and mark it as ICAO and then all of your devices will show up. Now we're going to step through doing this in CU Navigator. And only reason I'm doing this is because it's painful. Well, it's not painful. It's just not fall off a log obvious. Navigator will generate a FLARM radio ID like address, in other words, 6 hex digits, that it will use unless you select another address. And so a lot of times you'll see a weird unit ID sitting in the middle of a city. And what that is somebody's turned on Navigator in their cell phone, in their smartphone, and it's pumping out the canned address or the address that it calculated the first time it got started up in your phone. That address does stay constant unless they do a really, really major revision to the software. So that's not too bad. So you can set it up to be the ICAO address of your aircraft. For those of you that haven't seen the new version that just came out in the last couple of, maybe 2 weeks of Navigator, this is your new start screen, the new opening screen, and probably the best way to describe this screen is its flight management. So you've got your aircraft, and if you've got a target that you're headed to, your task information, what devices you're connected to in your aircraft, and stuff like that. So that's probably the best descriptor for that page. So this is you can have more than one aircraft defined. So this icon is your select aircraft icon. And if you notice, I've got 4 aircraft in my list. 2 of them are my Ventus. Notice that my Ventus says 15 meters right here. That's this one. I wish they had added the wingspan on this one. This one is 16.6 meters. So I've got 4 different aircraft listed, and 3 of the 4 aircraft have unique because these 2 are the same. So these 3 have unique ICAO identifiers. So I can, if I put in that I'm flying the K-21, it'll pick up the new identifier as soon as I switch the aircraft. If you don't have, if you, the type aircraft or your specific aircraft is not listed, this is the button you click on to go add a totally new aircraft, and it's got an extensive database, and I'm not going there because that's not the purpose. It's tonight's briefing. So in this case, I'm going to come down here and click on this guy. Once I click on it, I'm back on that flight management screen, and you notice that I've now got the K-21 listed as my aircraft. Okay. So if I click on the aircraft, I can go to the aircraft setup page. And the reason I want to get here is because my FLARM ID is not set. So we're going to set the FLARM ID. And so here's the edit button. And so now we are editing the entry for the K-21. I can put in the registration number, the competition ID, and now I can put in the FLARM ID. So I've entered the FLARM ID from a little exercise we did just a couple of minutes ago. So now my navigator in my cell phone that I carry in the K-21 will now output the correct ID. This is the icon to return to the previous page. And so now we're back on the previous page. That's the icon to return to the previous page. So now we're back on the flight management page. This is the icon to get to your map page. So now we're on the map page. Okay, the green and yellow and orange over here, I have, when I was doing this earlier today, I had the convergence layer turned on. This is a SkySight model that is dynamically loaded or downloaded while the system's running. So, and what we've got to do now is we want to go over to the layers page. And the reason we want to go over here is this is your layer control page. These icons control the display of layers on your map page. So like I had the convergence layer turned on over there. All right. The dark icons So this one is dark, but it's got a check mark in it. FLARM is dark. I'll talk about that in a moment. And my convergence is dark. So those three layers are active on my screen right now. The S on these icons indicate that those are SkySight uh, forecasts that are downloaded and displayed on my thing. OGN and SkySight both need active cell tower connection in order to display on the map page. Okay, so the connection can either be direct, for instance, like if you've got an ODN and it's got the cell phone circuits in it, it connects directly. My smartphone connects directly, but the tablet I use doesn't. So what I do is I use my smartphone as a hotspot and let the tablet talk to the smartphone, and then it talks to the cell towers. Okay, this icon is only displayed if you're connected to an active FLARM, or at least that's what it used to be. I'm not sure if that's changed, but that's what it was originally. It wasn't even displayed if you weren't connected to a FLARM. Okay. So here's the icon that we want to do. Now, what happens when we select this icon? It not only makes the data available on the display, but it also activates the connection to the OGN. So now that icon is dark, so it will be available on my map display. The OGN data will be available on my map display, and it is activated to talk to OGN. So as soon as I turned that on, I should have popped up on somebody's receiver, so that my house in my little town is now trying to fly on OGN. So one thing you do want to do is you want to come in and turn your OGN layer off once you're done for the day. Otherwise, anytime you run Navigator, like at home, it will connect to the OGN and start reporting its position. So to close the layers display, you just touch somewhere outside of the white box that's the layers display, and you come back to the map. Okay. So we're back to the map page. Something else that's important is that you shut down your Navigator software properly. Otherwise, it will, if you just, like on your cell phone, if you just said close the app, so like mine doesn't have a home button, so I'd swipe up, it'll close the app, or it looks like it closed the app, but what it really did is it just was running in the background. So it will continue to run in the background if the device is still on. Since you normally turn off your ODN, that's probably not a problem. But on a smartphone, if you don't shut Navigator down correctly, it will continue to operate in the background, using your GPS, using power, and sending data to the OGN. So we're going to go down here and click on go back to the flight management page. And then what you're going to do is you're going to scroll to the bottom of the page, and you see the sleep button right there. And when you click that, that starts the shutdown sequence. Navigator will remain in the background lapse list, but it is not active. It's not consuming power. It's not using your GPS, and it is not connected to external devices or external channels when it's in sleep. Okay. The FLARM setup. You're going to use FLARM. Okay. So the whole thing about using it, Navigator on a cell phone, that's everybody's probably first shot at using, the computer in flight, and also probably your first shot at using a tracker. Okay. If you've got a glider that's got a FLARM in it, you want to convert that over to the aircraft's ICAO address. You're going to edit a file called FLARM in the United States. You're going to edit a file called flarmconfig.txt. You want to use a text editor. This is going to be on your USB stick. You want to use a text editor, not a word processor. Word processors put extraneous data in there, and this is a text-only file. You want to search for the term ID, capital I, capital D. You may get multiple hits because the term ID is used in words as well. But what you're looking for is you're looking for a line that looks like this. So dollar, power farm, lac, S for set, ID for parameter, and then it's going to have a string of digits, at most 6 digits, and it right there. That string, if it's a 0, that means that your FLARM is using a random value for its radio ID every time it turns on. Doesn't do any good for tracking. I mean, you can't associate it with your contest number or anything. Okay. It can have a 6-digit hex, and that's if it begins with, like in the United States, if it begins with an A, that's your ICAO address. If it's all Fs, then that means that the FLARM is going to use its default radio ID number. And the default radio ID number in a FLARM will look something like this, DF00A5. Okay. So if I had a FLARM in the K21 and I'm using our example, I would change whatever I found to be the PFLAC S ID and then A3569F. Save the file, save the file and close it. And the next time you plug into your FLARM, it will update, it will execute the FLARM config.txt, and you will then have that as your aircraft ID. And so now your FLARM will work with the setting you put into OGN. Okay. If you use someone else's USB stick to update your software and they have a FLARM config.txt file, it will screw up your settings. You will get the updated software, but all of your settings will be screwed up, and especially your radio ID will be set to the radio ID that is in that person's FLARM config.txt file. Setting up Spot for OGN. Okay, Davis Chapins has done a great job for us. He maintains a CSV database, so comma separated variable. So for everybody else, that's an Excel file. It's got your Spot ID or your XML feed ID, the N number for your aircraft, and your name. Okay. He also provides the server that interfaces the Spot data to OGN, and he runs that for us. You submit a request. Now, we're going to take a look at the database. If you've already got a Spot and you registered it with the SSA, and he originally pulled the SSA's database, but things don't seem to be working, what you want to do is you go here and you can see the database. I'm going to do a search. So I'm going to say find in page, and I'm just going to look for my last name. And oh, that's interesting. Should be in there. Well, it's not. Okay. So you can see this is the character string that you'll get from Spot that you send him, your aircraft ICAO address, and then your name. Okay. And there are a whole bunch of them out there. So, oh, I didn't type it with my, so type your name correctly. I used a lowercase r. So here's my Ventus right here. Turns out that my 26 isn't in there, even though it's in the SSA's database. So one of my jobs is to go back and do that. Then you'll have to enable your, so if you're already in there, then you probably already have your XML feed turned on. If you're not in there, you're going to have to go back and enable your XML interface. Here's the Spot page to do that. I've got the link on the chart. So if you get the chart, you can click on it and go there. And then you have to fill out a spot to OGN request. Uh, this is a Google Docs that Davis has set up so that you can enter your information, cut and paste your XML feed, or I mean, copy and paste your uh, ICAO address and stuff like that, and can submit it to him. Okay. So this mechanism right now is currently a Google Docs file, and it requires him to do manual processing on it to update the database. So it may take a little while to do it. For all of you that are out there, if someone would like to help and has the skills to turn this manual process into a web-based automatic update mechanism, please contact me and I'll get you in touch with Davis. But you know, for as much as he's done, uh, he's not a web guru, you know, a web app guru. So if somebody's got the skills and they'd like to contribute to this effort, get in touch with me and I'll get you in touch with Davis. Okay, InReach, all the same steps. So but in InReach, they have something they call a map share, and then you get the map share and you take it over to the fill in the OGN request. And again, I'll put it on here just for completeness. If somebody's got the skills and is willing to volunteer the work, we'd really appreciate it. So, how does Black Forest use flight tracking? Most of our members have some kind of tracker. Um, the and all of our club gliders pretty soon are going to have full ADSB out, which means all of our club gliders will have a tracker. We have multiple members flying long cross-country flights. You know, you heard my bragging about what our members did when we started the presentation this evening. They generally don't all go in the same direction. We keep a clubhouse computer with a window open on a display, and that way we can monitor our members, especially late in the day. I mean, that's one of the things is, you know, we have ways to tell that not everybody's back, but we also want to kind of have an idea as to whether or not it looks like they're going to be able to make it back, you know, or do we, you know, I look up at that monitor and I go, oh, okay, all the chickens aren't home yet. I'll hang around until everybody's landed to make sure. And that's several of us do that. It's not just me. Several of us do that so that we always have folks there to help when somebody is coming back in late, or if they end up landing out, we've got some folks there that can, you know, saddle up and go get them. The other thing that we found with having this monitor up and running is when we have visitors that visit, you know, come into our clubhouse and they want to know about this, is it's a real wonderful outreach because it gives us a way to show them what we do. I mean, it's one thing to say we fly and we fly long distances and this and that and the other, but it's really kind of nice. They seem to grasp it when we put it up on a map on the screen and can show them the traces and where they are and stuff like that. One of the other things with this, you hit the land out button on your tracker or you send a message or you call. If you're using the automatic reporting from your tracker, when somebody is headed out, be sure that you send a map when sending out the retrieve crew and not just send them the coordinates, and make sure they have a cell phone so that the pilot and the retrieve crew can talk. I found out at Nephi a few years ago, I went out on a retrieve. Um, and they sent the lat long back from their tracker. I put it in my cell phone, and guess what? The two systems were not the same, and I drove to a point where the person wasn't, called them, got lucky, called them. Uh, and when I say got lucky, because I happened to be in a town and they happened to be where cell service was because they'd walked out to the road. They thought I should be there by then. Back where the glider was, there was no cell service. So be sure that everybody's got the same representation for where the location of the retrieve is supposed to be. Now, one more thing about as we look at this, uh, with our flight tracking systems. The OGN is absolutely fantastic and an awful lot of people love it. I carry a satellite tracker because I fly places that I am not in connection with uh, a cell tower. A couple of years ago, when I was first testing the Navigator software and the maps all had to come down in real time, and I got far enough out east from my airport and didn't have cell coverage, and all of a sudden my display went black because I couldn't download the maps. That's since been fixed, but the point being is even though I was only 50 or 100 miles out from a major metropolitan area, I was out of cell range. The other one is we also go out, fly out of Nephi. There's pretty good transponder coverage out at Nephi, radar coverage and transponder and ADSB-Out coverage out there. But if you're 50 miles out into the desert to the west of Nephi and you're below 3000 AGL because you're scratching, it was a lousy day, you may well be below the altitude at which your ADSB can report your position and get it into the system. So I carry a satellite receiver or satellite tracker with me for those reasons, because cell towers and FAA radars or ADSB towers aren't going to be always in view. But at least in the United States where I'm flying, my spot tracker's always in view, and the same with the InReach. So here's a summary of the systems that we've talked about. So Spot, InReach, Navigator, OGN, and the FAA's ADSB-Out. And so what the tracker is, what the communications infrastructure from from your aircraft to the processing on the ground, the data APIs, so Globalstar and their servers. So where is it going to display? Well, Davis's little interface to get it over to OGN, but it will also be on Spot's system. The same for InReach. CU Navigator, again, they're routing to the OGN server, so it'll be on any of the displays. And OGN, obviously, all the displays that are using OGN. And then for the FAA, there's a third-party interface that allows him to pull the data. And so that gets routed to the OGN. So basically, any of these tools over here, and we get it. We've come to the common display of using the OGN to get it out to the displays at our locations, and that's pretty special. That's pretty neat. So, summary. It's got a safety aspect, a strong safety aspect. So where are our folks? And late in the day, does it look like they can get home? It's also kind of fun to be in the clubhouse and, I'm not flying today because I'm doing something else. But look where everybody is. And then outreach where we can show folks, look where they are, look what we can do, which is, I think, absolutely fantastic as well. So we are down to questions.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. We have lots of questions. I'm going to try to summarize a few of them here. Is FLARM forwarding automatic?
Uh, it's a configurable setting, and I don't know what the default setting is.
Okay. For the N number ICAO address, why would you not just use the FAA registration database?
Oh, you can. It's just that yeah, you can use the FAA's registration database. You do an N number lookup, and it will kick the number out. Um, the I just gave that link because, if somebody's sitting there, going out and looking at the Club Glider and saying, "Oh, here's the N number, and I can hit this site and I've got it." That's all.
Okay. Is FLARM live enough for collision avoidance?
Is FLARM live
I'm sorry.
enough?
I'm sorry. I read that wrong. I apologize. FLARM is live enough for collision avoidance. Is OGN live enough for collision avoidance?
No.
Okay.
It now you noticed I didn't specifically mention it when I was talking about using Navigator. Navigator, when you connect to the OGN layer, it's going to display other aircraft that are near you. And the key is that's for situational awareness only on that display. That is not a collision avoidance display because it can be up to minutes behind the location of the aircraft that's on your display.
Okay. For those of us renting gliders, how do we register the plane for tracking purposes? And I believe this is back to OGN.
Um, okay, other than WeGlide, okay, you're renting a glider, so I'm assuming you're going to run, let's say you're going to run Navigator on your smartphone, and that's going to be your computer in the cockpit, plus that's going to be your tracker. Under those circumstances, all you've got to do, it would be nice to put the ICAO address for that IN number in your software. But you don't have to be registered with OGN for OGN to track your glider and display it. It's a nice to have because it gives additional information about your glider. You saw that it had my glider type, it had my contest number, and stuff like that. But you don't have to have that in order to have your tracker work with OGN. It will work just fine without that registration. The one place that I know of for sure that it won't work is WeGlide will not display a glider that is not registered in the OGN database. But all of the other display devices seem to work. I didn't find any restriction mentioned in their literature about you have to be registered in the OGN DDB, the device database. So it's not necessary. You'll still be tracked.
Okay. If you have ADSB, and I believe this is ADSB-Out, do you need a spot device?
Yes, because while we have very good coverage in the United States above 3,000 feet AGL, the coverage below 3,000 feet AGL is a lot sketchier. And there are areas in the United States that do not have good ADSB out coverage, especially down in the 3 to 5,000 AGL range. But there are actually areas that have no ADSB coverage for towers. The only way you could get it is by radar. And then you also have a floor level on that as well.
Okay, and I'm going to paraphrase this question because I think I know what it's asking. On the OGN towers, if it's a little bit outside of its range, or I guess maybe the question would be on this, what is the specific range of the OGN towers? Is it line of sight? Is it a specific radius of line of sight?
Okay, it's okay. Basically, OGN is the FLARM transmits on a channel at roughly 950 megahertz. So it is purely line of sight. So the range is uh, if you've got an obstruction like a mountain, then it's not going to get there. Otherwise, the OGN receivers seem to be pretty good receivers. Most of them are running an amplifier right at the antenna, which means they don't get a whole lot of noise from a cable, and then process the data. I showed you on the chart where we had like that one chart that showed 3 stations that were reporting a single aircraft, and the aircraft was at least 40 miles from the closest station, and it was over 70 miles from the furthest station. So we're getting pretty good coverage from this.
Yeah, it's awesome. I know we love it at our club. Um, and I think this is kind of like a theoretical question. Does the Starlink satellite system play any role in anything that we would use? Do you think it will in the future? What's your opinion on that?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, Starlink is very much like the oh rats, I lost it. It's the old Hughes network system.
Right.
Uh, and so it's a subscriber system to start with, and it's intended to be actually your node onto the network. So I don't see it as being directly applicable to this kind of a task. And plus, you'd have to, it would be another subscription service, and I'm not sure how it would play out.
Just what I need, another subscription service, Dave.
Yeah.
There is another question on WeGlide, but I believe we're covering that in 2 weeks. Is that correct? That's the OLC and WeGlide is our
Yeah.
last presentation. Is that right?
Yeah. But you can go ahead and ask the question. It's,
Okay. Is WeGlide Copilot similar to CU Navigator?
oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll have that answer in 2 weeks.
There we go. Perfect. And the last question, and this is just maybe we go back to the beginning slides. Can you repeat how to find the webinar and the slides on the SSA website, please?
Okay. Um, Alrighty. The Everybody close your eyes for a minute so you don't get sick.
I know that the slides are available and the audio is available. Is that correct?
Yes, or they will be within a couple of days.
Couple days, and that's on members.ssa.org.
Correct.
And if you don't have a login, go and create a login so you have access to it.
Well, you've got to be an SSA member to get there to start
Correct.
with.
Yep.
Right there. Yep, that's up on the screen.
Perfect.
So you log in with your member. This is the one where you log in with your member number. The member site, you log in with your member number, and then go to there. It'll have a thing in the center of the page, just towards the top, that says My Home Page. You click on that, and then you'll have some pull downs, and one of them is news and resources, and then the entry on that is webinars. And then, like I said, if you click on the webinar title, you get the recording and it's the recording, but it's the whole video. And then if you click on the slides, you just get the slides and they'll be in PDF format.
This is Frank, if you want to just watch the video, it will be on the SSA's YouTube channel under the webinar playlist. And it'll also be available if you just go to the www.ssa.org/webinars. It'll be up there by tomorrow.
So lots of ways to get to
We'll
it.
have the slides.
So lots of ways to get to it.
That was all the questions we had.
All righty. Well, thank you, everyone. Our next session will be on the OLC and WeGlide, and that will be on May 3rd, so 2 weeks from tonight. And if there are no more questions, I'm done, and it's back to you, Frank.